rehost, replatform, refactor, rebuild, replace with SaaS. All of these are different ways that you can potentially take an existing platform and bring it forward into a modern environment. Today I'm going to run through a handful of things you want to at least consider doing before you pull the trigger on which option you should go through. So starting with number one, and this really, you should already probably have started doing this if you're even asking the question, which is to just do a comprehensive overview and assessment of the application, what it talks to, what systems it's using, what integrations it has, what versions, can things be upgraded? So if you have a vendor product that's sitting on top of a particular version of SQL Server, for example, and they don't have an upgrade path, like you're stuck on SQL Server 2008, for example, or the hosting technology doesn't support modern web protocols like WebSockets or TLS 1.1 if you're really old, although that's a security problem. You really want to get that one checked out. You want to outline all that before you make any decisions. Enumerate everything. The goal is simply to fully understand and document what the system's using. Whether it's a vendor product that you don't necessarily know what it's written in, or whether it's a homegrown solution that is crucial to some business process. You take that assessment and you go step by step and you say, all right, what are the technologies it's using? What are the versions? What's the latest secure version of that? What's the current recommended version of that? Because they're not always the same, right? .NET 4.8, as of the time of this video, I think it's a 4.8 or 4.7.2 are still valid and they receive security updates. However, the recommended version is 4.8.2, I think, at this point, or something higher. I haven't actually looked. .NET Core is probably a better example. Security updates still rolling out for 6.0. 7 is done. 8 is going to be LTS for another year. 9's out. And then 8's done. 9's going to be done the same time. Everyone's going to need to get on 10. It's a moving target. So modern tooling and frameworks have done a good job of kind of tightening that so you're forced to keep up so that they're more secure. That's one of it is you make money because that's their business, but also like they invest in active security monitoring and tracking and bug fixing and patching. So you want to stay current. So if you're looking at an older solution, you want to see what the viability is to simply upgrade to the latest secure version to buy yourself some time. Because if it's not secure, there's liability there. You want to be very careful. Once you've figured out your tech stack, you look at the workflows overall. So forget the technology for a minute. Look at what your business is using, right? Are they touching the system every day? Is it like some quarterly process that doesn't need to that could be done by hand if need be? Like figure out what the impact is if this thing were to disappear tomorrow. And then look at the benefits of having the system in place. What does it automate? What does it replace? What could you do differently that might mean you might not even need the system or a derivative of the system? And then from there, map out your options. Once you have that full assessment, you figure out, okay, if the business is willing to change the way they do something, we could just get rid of this thing entirely. If they're not, okay, what processes do we need to automate and support relative to that? From there, you can go look at options. If it's a buy versus build mentality, find similar products, find the latest version of that thing and figure out how much it would cost to just completely upgrade. If there is no latest version of that thing, if it's homegrown, how much is it going to cost for custom dev to build a new thing? Walk that path as far as you need to go to have all of those types of options kind of laid out and a relative cost for each. You might find out halfway down it, like, this isn't worth custom dev. We can't spend $500,000 to build this from scratch, and we could probably live without it. At which point, you make a business process change. And it's more of an enterprise architecture question to figure out how that information and knowledge flows from where it is today to where it needs to go without that system. If you decide, oh, we can't automate this. It's processing hundreds of thousands of documents a day. Like, we need this system, but it's 15 years old. Then you look at the cost of replacing it with a vendor solution relative to how much you would have to pony up if you did have to do it manually. And there's your value proposition. And then you compare that to how much a custom solution might cost you. And you'd be surprised, today's world, if you have that dialed in for exactly what you need that system to do and what it's supposed to facilitate, you might find that a custom solution targeted to what you need is cheaper than one of these off the shelf. It has 1,000 bells and whistles. Because remember, if you're buying something off the shelf, it's catering to a much larger audience than you, which means you're going to have to spend a lot of time configuring it, honing it in, dialing it in, because people are going to be like, ooh, look at that button. Hey, why don't we use this? Hey, why don't we use that? Which is what the vendor wants because they built the product. But you're going to have to spend all that time, sunk time, figuring out what you do and do not use of the product relative to what you originally were doing. Some of that might be innovation. Some of that might improve your business process. But either way, you're going to have to spend the time evaluating the vendor products and whether or not they meet the goal. Whereas a custom solution, you can just laser target, focus on exactly what you need and build to that. Find some good development resources that have decades of experience in it to reduce your risk, and develop a tight relationship with them, embed them in the process long enough for them to understand, rather than just stick them on it like an assembly line and say, oh, they're just developers. They're just going to go develop. Here's $500,000. Go do it. They need time to understand it if you want it done well, if you're going to do a custom. Same is true once you lock in and decide on a vendor. If you decide a vendor solution, they need to come and understand what their product needs to support. If they're not willing to do that, that's a red flag, because you're going to need to integrate with them and spend 100% of your time where they just ship what they have and then say, you have to figure out how to use it. So hopefully that makes sense. But you've got to look at the vendor solution. You've got to look at what it would cost to build it from scratch relative to just upgrading it. And if you can't upgrade it and you can't build it and you can't find a solution, the middle one is true. You're going to have to build something, or you're just going to have to get rid of it. So those four things: you either just don't have it, you get rid of it, you upgrade it and you hobble along. You basically kick the can down the road to the extent that you can to keep it secure, or you build it from scratch. If it's too expensive to build it from scratch, you look at vendor solutions. Vendor solutions will be cheaper, but you're going to have to pay that time with resources to assess, what the solution is and whether or not it fits your workflow. And by the time you've done that, you'll realize that more likely that custom solution probably is about the same. And then you cut out the noise of looking at vendor products. Now, I'm not knocking vendor products. Plenty of things out there are much better off being bought and used because they have all these correlated features that add value. Absolutely. I've just seen so many, and it's biased because all I've done is custom development for 20 years. I'm biased towards the fact of every time you've taken a product that has like 20% of it fits our use case, 9 times out of 10, the other 80% gets in the way and it ends up being worse, slower, or various hoops have to be jumped through to just make it do what the old thing used to do. Because, like, for example, SharePoint. Hey, we're going to use SharePoint for document management. I had a system built on an AS400. Document management was push button on keyboard, file is now in storage. Push button on keyboard, now I have the file and it's printing. Can't do that from a web interface. And you definitely couldn't do that with SharePoint 2008. So there was a lot of frustration. I have to click how many times from that team. Things to consider. Business users ultimately are the ones that have to use this, and they're the ones you're going to have to tally the lost time and productivity for to figure out if it's worth it. The integration time, the time spent by an IT department to shepherd a custom solution to scratch, is a one-time thing, 9 times out of 10, unless you engage with a vendor that actively seeks to embed a support agreement, like a long-term support agreement, because this is going to ruffle some feathers. A lot of times there's incentive from those consulting shops to do enough work to secure continual work. If you get what I'm saying. So you got to be really careful with those types of engagements. You want to find one that builds stuff and builds it to say it's complete and it's done, supports it until there are no bugs, and then could care less and wants different work. If you want one that wants to be embedded for the long haul, it's great. You're going to now have to pay them hundreds of thousands of dollars every year to support whatever they build. Sounds a little facetious, but I've seen it like the past decade. Every company brings in vendor builds a bunch of stuff. Internal resources try to figure out what they wrote. It's not a good quality. Pick it up. Try to deal with it. Maybe switch vendors because the vendor itself can't actually figure out how it was put together. So you got to be really careful when you're deciding on vendors. You want to see existing work. You want to talk to existing customers at the technical and engineering levels, not just the business. The CEO might say, oh, this thing's great. It saves us $200,000. But a third of their IT department, all they do is firefight with the thing. You want to talk to all the levels, all the way up and down when you're assessing vendors. If they won't let you or they don't give you references, that's also a red flag. Within that, so coming back to the topic at hand, which is application modernization assessments. Once you have figured out which of those 4 avenues, like you're going to get rid of it. You're going to modernize it to the best that you can and live with it for a few more years, which is essentially just deferring to options 1 or 3 or 4. You're going to rewrite it from scratch. Worth thinking about. You're going to find a vendor or multiple vendors and assess them all and let them argue and vie for your business in a competitive way. Maybe produce a good deal. Once you've figured out which one of those avenues you're going to go down, you got to extrapolate the lay of the land as far as what the business is thinking, because you might need to modernize it because it hits a compliance wall. Like, it's not like we can't have this thing in the building because it's security vulnerability. The business might not care. You're going to have to get buy-in at an executive level to say, we're going to change this to this. Now, the politics that go along with that usually means you've got to inject something of value into the mix for them to sign off on the modernization. Or you've got to get compliance and risk and finance involved to say, supporting this thing is too risky. We have to replace it. Now, problem with that arrangement is it's true, and you'll probably get buy-in from the very top of the organization, but everyone you need to chip in is in the middle and near the bottom, and they don't really have an incentive to change. So you've got to play the politics of the organization. If it isn't like an ESOP or something where everyone is aligned for the best goals of the business first and foremost, the way I would suggest going about that is once you have all that assessment done and you ideally have talked to end users as well in the mix, not just reviewed like the products that are available, find some of their pain points and see if you can address some of them in the conversation. And then the modernization solution becomes more than just, we have to replace this because it's old. It's we're going to improve this handful of things for you. To do that, we have to upgrade this because it's too old and it can't do it. Once you've worked through that, and that's going to be different for every organization. Like, I could tell you stories I won't hear because some of those companies are still around and kicking. It gets weird. There's some things you might have to trade that you didn't expect to have to trade. I'll just say it that way. Once you've made all the deals you need to make and come up with kind of the scope that the project needs to hold to, what things you're going to add, whether it's a custom solution that adds on to what the current thing already does and just replatformed, rebuilt from scratch, whatever terminology you want to use. Once you have the buy-in you need, once you have walked the entire landscape and figure out like the scope of the integrations this thing has, like the weird project that some random intern built for you 6 years ago that's pulling data from this into these 2 tables in particular in the data warehouse that no one touches except for the CTO. And it's a report that has to run every week, so it can't go away. Those types of things. Once you've figured all of that out, then you want to look at what the toolkit is and what the resources would be that would go and build this project. Because at that point, you want to not just look at someone that's familiar with the technology that you're going to build in, because you're presumably, if you're going to build a custom solution, going to pick the newest technologies. That's not as much of a concern usually. Or if it's a vendor product, they're going to have recommendations for integrators that they work with. You're going to want to look for someone that knows the domain knowledge first and foremost that's relevant to the migration. If it's a finance system, if it's an inventory tracking system, specific types of gotchas that have come up along the way. You want someone from your organization that's been around for a while as a business analyst, as a project manager, as a product owner, someone that knows what this thing needs to do. That's your key man resource for the project. Once you have that, you look around the room and you decide, okay, who's familiar with how the old system works? That might mean a developer that isn't even a developer anymore. You might need to go tap a VP that graduated and worked on it 6 years ago. And guess what? You now need to understand and remember to help us understand what this thing is supposed to do. And then you're going to take those 3 sets of people that understand what it needs to do, people that know how the current system works, and the people that are going to presumably be building the new one. And you're going to want to make them all very familiar with how each other talk. That's your team. From there, you branch on to specializations, right? You're going to need infrastructure and continuous delivery type things. You're going to need people that understand Azure, if you're using cloud, Azure or AWS. If you're writing it in pure native JavaScript, someone that knows Express, someone that knows Vue or Angular or React. You're gonna assemble all those strategic resources if you don't have Swiss Army knives that you can lean on. And I would recommend having at least one Swiss Army resource in that mix, some high-level architect, somebody that knows all the pieces and how they're supposed to fit together, because they're going to be able to sit in a room and see and listen to people talk past each other and be able to say, wait a minute, you said A and you thought he said B. In reality, neither of you know what you're talking about relative to each other. So slow down and let's make sure everyone understands the decision that you just said we're going to make and you said we're going to make, which are in conflict. And champion that, which isn't the same as the project manager. The project manager is trying to make the thing move forward and get stuff done. In very much a different sense, the architect is saying, I don't care if it gets done. I care that it makes sense. Because at the end of the day, the system has to make sense, even if it takes an extra 6 months. If you say it's done at the 12-month mark and nobody can use it, it's not done. And no one's going to understand what happened because it went off the rails 6 months before. It's a constant shepherding action for the entire project to get it to the point where you can actually set it and forget it. And if you really want to get it to set it and forget it, you've got to have someone focused in on making sure everyone understands what all the moving parts are and how they fit together. Which brings me to my final point. You can't roll this thing out at once. There is no big bang. You can't just, and now you've replaced it. Everyone in the mix that's going to be using this thing when it switches over needs to have seen and understood what's changing, where it's going, what's going away, what's staying, which means a lot of people need to be in the loop. Now, you might not be able to replace the thing outright without going big bang. Like, you might need a cutoff, but the first time that you show it to them can't be 2 weeks before they have to start using it. They need to see it long before then, and they need to have some level of ownership in how it was put together. It could be arbitrary. So let's be clear. Picking the colors of the buttons, right? Now you have ownership in the decisions. Doesn't mean you change the technical underpinnings. Doesn't mean you throw 3 times as much hardware consumables at it. But you want everyone to be bought in. Therefore, everyone needs a little bit of something to say, this is my system. Once you've established that, then you can start building. And then you start showing. And then your architect and your project manager are essentially going to tag team the different types of issues if you do it right. One will be take the technical problems and make sure they stay coherent for the duration of the project. Make sure everyone understands what we're doing. And that might mean talking to end users and say, you realize you're not going to be able to click that button anymore. You're going to click this button and this button. Is that a problem? And then you're going to have the PM say, I understand you want to just have this, but that's going to take a month to build on top of our scope. Kid, you need to go get buy-in from somebody other than us. Otherwise, we can't include it. And the two of you are just going to be like Batman and Robin, back and forth, making sure this thing walks forward. That by the end of it, both of you are interchangeable in the sense of you've been there for all the product level decisions, and he's been there for all the technical exchanges. So you both understand what
isn't going to happen. Everyone else in the room should also be at that point. And then, and only then, can you say you didn't accidentally do a big bang rollout. Because if you get to the end of the project and people are like, oh, I didn't expect that to work. Now you rolled it out. It's too late. The train is moving that fast and you cannot slow it down. So be very careful and make sure everyone understands what is and isn't happening when you're doing that modernization effort. Because it's not greenfields development. It's a system that already exists, and there's probably a large amount of people that don't want it to change. So if you want it to go well, they have to know it's changing. And best case scenario, they want the things that are changing to happen, even if there's some things that they might not want to happen. Notice I didn't mention anything about technology choices, tool choices. All that's up to the team. You might decide Ruby is the right answer because your environment. Might be .NET, might be Java. Doesn't matter. What matters is everyone understands and is aligned to the goal. That is the only way you can successfully migrate a solution. The mechanics of a change between those four options, right? If you're getting rid of it, it's all business process. If you're just upgrading it, there might be a handful of things that are going to stop working when you go from SQL 2008 to SQL 2016 because some deprecated feature. Greenfield, vendor product, basically the same. The only difference is the type of engagement. You're not going to need as many technical resources for a vendor engagement as you would custom dev. Theoretically. Depending on the system, might be an exception to that rule. You're going to still have to make sure everyone on all sides understands how information is now going to flow with that new version of the system. Because that's really what architecture is at the end of the day. Understanding and optimizing the flow of information, whether it's through an application, through the enterprise, or between organizations. It's the exact same thing. So I hope you found this useful. If you liked it, feel free to subscribe. I'm going to try and put out one or more of these videos every week covering different specific topics. Thank you for watching.